All right, everybody, let's start. Thank you all for joining us today for the second presentation in the Diversity and Inclusion Committee's educational series, Testing the Divide, the Power Reporting Behind the Long Island Divided Investigation. Before I introduce our speaker, I'd like to recognize our line officers in attendance this morning, President Jan Layton, President-elect Gary Nelson, and First Vice President Eric Gibbs. Throughout the presentation, if you wish to ask a question, please type it into the chat box in all caps. We have with us today Bill Dedman, one of the lead reporters on Newsday's undercover investigation of racial steering by real estate agents. He designed the hidden camera project called Long Island Divided, which showed agents reinforcing racial segregation through illegal steering of home buyers. The project has launched investigations by state and federal authorities and several steps by the National Association of Realtors to increase awareness of fair housing issues. Newsday's team received several national awards for this work, including a Peabody Award. Long Island Divided and its 40-minute documentary film, Testing the Divide, are online at newsday.com/divided. Bill is a Pulitzer Prize-winning investigative reporter and #1 best-selling author of the biography, Empty Mansions. He received the 1989 Pulitzer Prize in investigative reporting for his work at the Atlanta Journal-Constitution on The Color of Money, his series on racial discrimination by home lenders in middle-income Black neighborhoods. He has spoken on fair housing and fair lending issues for the National Association of Realtors, the Federal Reserve, and many financial associations. Bill's going to address for us how the tests of real estate agents were conducted, the major findings, what can agents do to ensure fair treatment of consumers, and what training and resources are available. Bill, take it away.
Thank you, Steve. Good morning, everyone. I'm excited to have this opportunity to share with you our Newsday team's work on fair housing. Thank you so much for the invitation. It's gratifying. It's sort of surprising that real estate associations around the country have responded to a newspaper's investigation and are using it to provoke an important conversation. I'm hoping that together we can dive into looking at some snippets of our Newsday video of agents in action, perhaps not on their best days, and that we can talk about what agents can say about schools, about new training available. My goal is for this session to be helpful to you, but also challenging, something to think about and to take action on.
You won the Pulitzer Prize for an investigation into mortgage lending practices. I thought it might be interesting for our viewers to hear a brief summary of that investigation and how does that investigation compare with this one?
Yes, I think there's some lessons to connect them. The stories for the Atlanta newspapers were called The Color of Money. They're online. They were about redlining, the practice of mortgage lenders doing business on one part of the map, but not another. This was back in the late 1980s. Redlining had gotten attention earlier, but seemed to be thought of as something from the past. We found that lenders were making home loans in white areas, even lower income white areas, but not in Black areas, even the higher income areas that were home to Coretta Scott King and the vice presidents from Coca-Cola and Delta Airlines. A couple of things resonate from that. First, the customer would have no way to know where the banks didn't make loans. The customer would have no basis for making a complaint. But we looked at how the banks operated. For example, we found where branches had been closed, which real estate agents the banks did or didn't market to, and even where customers could put in loan applications. So one lesson, I think, was that we learned how small actions, small differences, perhaps even unintentional ones, could have a huge impact in perpetuating a segregated system. And I'd like to mention a more recent project for the Boston Globe, looking at traffic stops. in Massachusetts. The series is called Speed Trap. An interesting thing about being stopped by an officer for speeding is that we were all speeding. But we have no way to know if we were being treated equally with others who were stopped. So, for example, if you get a warning, did everyone get a warning? If you get a ticket, is everyone else getting a ticket? It's similar to being a real estate customer or a banking customer. You would have no basis to complain. What we found was that in Massachusetts, who gets a ticket and who gets a warning is easy to predict if you know the race, sex, and age of the driver. For example, women much more often get a warning, especially younger women up to about age 40. It's the same as who gets roles in Hollywood. Minorities almost always got the ticket, especially Black and Latino men. So there seemed to be some racial profiling at work in the decision being made at the car window. Again, the customers wouldn't know. Maybe even the officers wouldn't know how it breaks down. Like with home mortgages, public records told us the result, the pattern, and then we had to try to dig in to figure out, well, how is this happening? I think what's different about Long Island Divided and our project on steering and real estate is that we're not coming along later looking at records. With the video cameras, you can watch people violate the law. And as we all know, and I've been reminded of frequently and recently, it really makes a difference for people to see video to believe that something is happening. And seeing specific agents and the names of their brokerages on the screen, I think that really helped lead to a greater impact and maybe to some changes in the system.
The Newsday investigation has become the most prominent example of the evidence of race-based bias in real estate. Why did Newsday start the investigation in the beginning?
Well, Steve, to set the scene, Long Island stretches east of New York City for more than 100 miles, with more than 3 million people in 2 counties. It's a heavily segregated suburb, perhaps the most heavily segregated in the nation. And what we mean by that is that there's a lot of diversity overall, people from all races and nationalities. But especially African Americans are concentrated in very few communities. Out of more than 200 communities on Long Island, a majority of the Black residents live in only 8 of those. Now, we had heard anecdotes for a long time from Black home buyers who had encountered problems trying to buy a home or look for a home in a wider or somewhat integrated area. And we wanted to get beyond anecdote. But we had heard this even from our own colleagues at the newspaper. So we followed the methods used by fair housing agencies and sometimes government agencies that do testing. But we added hidden cameras for video and audio. That's legal in New York, and it's legal in most states, including Arizona. Most state laws require only one party to a conversation, and that one party can be the home buyer, the tester, to consent to audio recording. Now, hidden audio recording is not allowed in about a dozen states, but even there, testing can happen. Testers can be debriefed. We can look at the listings that they were given. Testing can happen everywhere. Now, let me show you an introductory part of our film. The project is called Long Island Divided. The film is called Testing the Divide. It's all at the same address. It's all at newsday.com/divided. What happened in this little video clip surprised us, but we saw it over and over again. One customer received service from an agent, while another customer in the same circumstance is refused service.
We're not going to like those schools. But you don't want to go there. It's a mixed neighborhood.
Mixed neighborhood.
If agents are courteous and professional, how can you know that they're treating you equally compared with someone of a different race or ethnicity?
I have to say it without saying it,
Behind smiles and handshakes, how do you know if they're giving you fewer options or suggesting different areas?
I'm not going to send you anything you
unless you don't want to start your car to buy your flat.
Or that rules don't apply to you and another home buyer in the same way.
Yeah, okay, I definitely need that.
Long Island is one of America's most segregated suburbs. Newsday set out to discover what role real estate agents might play in keeping it that way, potentially affecting the quality of lives.
Technically, as a real estate agent, you shouldn't tell the buyers.
In house hunting, it's nearly impossible to see evidence of hidden discrimination. You would never know unless you go undercover.
In one test, Johnny Mae Alston was the black tester and Cindy Parry was the white tester. And they met with Anne-Marie Quealy-Bichon at Signature Premier Properties office in Cold Spring Harbor. They asked for the same thing. As often happens, the agent discussed getting pre-qualified or pre-approved for a mortgage by a bank, showing how much a buyer can spend on a house.
You pre-qualified, I guess. My husband's working with somebody in the bank. We've done some preliminary talks, about getting pre-approval.
Neither had been pre-approved or pre-qualified. Here's what the agent told the black tester.
So I really need that. I won't take out anyone unless you have a pre-qualification letter. So I need to. So that means I can't pre-qualify for a mortgage. Oh, so that means I can't go out to see anything. I won't do it. You can try another person, but I don't have the time.
And without pre-approval, here's what the agent told the white tester.
What is your availability? When can you start looking at houses? I would say not this coming week.
Cindy received 79 listings from this agent. Johnny Mae couldn't get any listings. And Cindy, the white tester, received 2 home tours. They had the same finances, the same budget, and they made the same request in the same area. But one was white, the other was black. The agent treated them differently.
Bill, please give us a summary of the tests. Who was tested and what was the outcome?
Yes. So, Steve, our Newsday team focused on home sales, no rentals, sending out first-time home buyers. We'd send a white home buyer and then an Asian home buyer, or white and black, or white and Hispanic, shopping for their families. And we would mix up who would go first. The home buyers gave the agent the same circumstances, first-time home buyers, so selling another property was not involved. We chose testers of the same gender and roughly the same age. We dressed them in the same business casual style. We bought shirts for the men. I went shopping at Nordstrom for similar purses for the women. They asked for the same number of bedrooms and had the same family size. And they were prepared to give the same income and same credit scores, but rarely were asked for any financial information other than mortgage pre-approval status, as you saw, on which they were identical. We shopped for houses from entry level. Now, in New York City area prices, entry level is about $400,000 to the high end, $7 million. Now, $7 million won't get you Alec Baldwin's house out in the Hamptons, but it'll get you into his neighborhood. Always the same price range, though, for both testers in a pair. And they saw the same agent. That wouldn't really be necessary for a fair housing investigation or lawsuit. Under the law, 2 different agents at the same brokerage are also supposed to treat customers equally. But we thought it would be more fair and more persuasive to have the same agent see both customers. How did we pick the agents? We didn't. The brokerages picked which agents would be tested, though they didn't know it. Whoever was on the board to handle walk-ins or phone calls or internet contacts, that was the agent we tested. We did 86 of these paired tests at 12 companies, 12 brands that together represent more than half of the sellers in our market. familiar names, Coldwell Banker, Keller Williams, Century 21, Remax, as well as large regional brands. Our team then reviewed more than 200 hours of videos to see how the customers were treated and analyzed the thousands of listings they were given to see what school districts and communities they were directed to. We didn't feel comfortable being the referees, so we had two fair housing experts review each test for equal treatment. One had run a testing program for the Department of Justice, and the other is the law professor who wrote the textbook on fair housing law. And only if both of our referees independently threw a flag did we call a penalty on an agent. But we didn't publish yet. Before we published, we gave the agents and their brokerages details, invited them to come in and watch the videos so they could respond to our findings. So this was a careful effort. It took more than 3 years, was not a drive-by investigation. Now, the results. The agents gave unequal treatment in 40% of our tests. And the tests varied, the results varied in interesting ways. Asian buyers were treated differently than their white counterparts 19% of the time, so 2 out of 10 on average. Hispanic buyers were treated differently than their white counterparts 39% of the time, 4 out of 10. And Black buyers were treated differently than their white counterparts 49% of the time, 5 out of 10. Most of the attention has been on that high difference for Black and white customers. But I wouldn't lose sight of the rest. If 4 out of 10 Hispanic buyers, if 2 out of 10 Asian buyers are being treated poorly half a century after the civil rights laws were passed, those seem like high numbers as well. We viewed this project as testing the gatekeepers in real estate to see how they perform. 2 of the 12 companies, 2 small regional companies, passed all of their tests. It's fair to say that most of these major national and regional real estate companies were contributing to the racial segregation in our suburbs. I guess you have to ask yourself, would the results be any different if we repeated the test in your community? If 4 retired police officers from Las Vegas showed up shopping for homes, 1 white, 1 Black, 1 Asian, 1 Hispanic, and came to your offices, if they had the same price range, would they go home with the same listings? Now, what sort of differences did we see? First, we saw steering. Agents directed 1 out of 4 of our minority homebuyers into different communities and different school districts altogether than their white counterparts. We also saw differences in how customers were screened or qualified. Well, 1 buyer would be asked for ID, the minority buyer, but the white buyer would not. Some agents wouldn't help our Black or Hispanic buyer unless they signed an exclusive contract with that brokerage. But the brokerage didn't require a contract of the white buyer. And then there were inappropriate comments by agents. Interestingly, minority buyers weren't subjected to racial comments or inappropriate remarks. They got smiles and handshakes. We're past the days of signs that say whites only. But it was the white buyers who heard inappropriate comments about race. Here's a video clip highlighting the problem of inappropriate comments.
Hispanic community came in, and they really took over Springs and Northwest Woods area.
Here, an agent gives conflicting advice about Freeport.
I like Freeport. Now you have a bad school district, and that's not good for resale value.
All the school bus, see the moms that are hanging out on the corners.
But you don't want to go there. It's a mixed neighborhood. It's mini United Nations.
Because you might be more comfortable in a certain demographic area that isn't heavily
one way or another in terms of the people. Bayshore has two school districts, Brentwood and Bayshore. You don't want to have Brentwood school districts. You want to have Bayshore school district.
I can't say anything, but I encourage you. I want you to go there at 10 o'clock at night with your white diapers. Go to that 7-Eleven. They didn't buy there.
No, that's great.
I have to say it without saying it. You know, you have the knowledge of the areas.
Yes.
You know. I don't want to use the word steer, but I try to. I'll use another word. I educate in the areas. You know.
Yeah. How are you, Russ? Hey, Russ. Good. How are you?
We're either waiting for the owner or waiting for the agent to show up.
You don't want to be. I don't think you should be in Elmont. I think you should probably just be Franklin Square.
And I remember specifically, he talked about steering.
Yes, that's what he said. Steering, yeah.
Yeah. And in the same breath, he mentioned, well, steering's bad, but this is what I'm going to do.
There's something called steering. No steering, you know, like steering.
Oh, like a car or something?
No, like a horse, even.
You know, it seems that some agents may have gotten a message that complying with the fair housing laws is some sort of political correctness, that it means not saying the wrong thing or not saying the wrong thing to the wrong person who might complain about it. Our test suggests that we need more attention to steering, to differential treatment on what agents do instead of just what they say. And are they giving the same advice to all clients? Are they treating all clients equally?
We've been talking about steering. What forms did this unequal treatment take?
Well, steering is sort of an imprecise term, Stephen. I guess I may use it a little bit too broadly. It's sometimes used as a catch-all for various behaviors. We saw agents, for example, telling one person that there's no housing in an area in your price range, but then showing housing in that area, in that price range to another buyer. That's steering. Making unsolicited comments about the race or ethnicity or religion of people who live in an area, or comments about the schools, comments about crime, comments about resale values, as a way of encouraging or usually discouraging someone from looking there while giving contrary information to someone else or being silent on those matters with someone else. That's steering. We heard agents, you just saw an example, tell a white buyer to avoid an area because of poor resale values while encouraging the minority buyer to look there. We also saw differences in the level of service. Overall, our white testers got 50% more listings than their black counterparts. Now, we've been discussing this in terms of individual buyers, but look at it neighborhood by neighborhood for a moment. Both testers would ask for an area, let's say within half an hour of downtown. And that area, that circle, would include many communities and neighborhoods and school districts. But sometimes in the wider residential parts of that circle, the listings would be given only to our white buyer. So the minority buyer is, in effect, steered around those communities. That's what we were testing for. But then something else happened we didn't expect. We had minority communities inside the same circle for both buyers, where neither buyer of either race got the listings, although homes were for sale in the price range. These were the communities with more than a modest amount of black population. The agents were steering around those properties, those communities, for all buyers. Well, our fair housing experts said, who has the lawsuit in that case? Well, it's a long list. Not only are the white and minority home buyers being steered illegally, and both of them have a lawsuit under the Fair Housing Act, but the communities themselves are being harmed, the governments, and anyone who has tried to sell a home in those areas, and their listing brokers have a lawsuit under the Fair Housing Act against the brokerages that are steering around their communities and their listings. You know, fewer buyers means lower home values, lower appraisals, lower home equity, and less tax money for schools. Here's a video clip with a classic example of steering. An agent tells one family, one man and shopping for his family, that an area would be a good place to live with the nicest neighbors. And the agent warns another man for his family that it's a dangerous place.
Kelvin Toon is a black man in his early 50s, and he went in to meet with an agent involving a test in the Brentwood community, a community that is 80% Hispanic and black. The agent communicated to Kelvin, our black tester, that she enjoyed meeting with clients from the Brentwood area.
Every time I get a new listing in Brentwood or a new client, I get so excited because they're the nicest people.
When we sent Kelvin's counterpart in to meet with the same agent, the white tester was actually warned about Brentwood not being a nice place.
The nursing home we need to be near is in Brentwood.
Okay.
And so we found a couple that are in Brentwood.
Pretty close to each other.
Okay. And it just seemed like those would be handy also for going
Do you
to
want to
visit.
give me them and I'll look into them for you? Or?
Yeah, I can do that.
That warning came later to the white testers saying there was concern about gang activity going on in Brentwood. This agent wanted the white tester to know, but that information wasn't provided to Kelvin, the black tester. The listings centered black tester Kelvin in Brentwood with 27 house listings, while the white tester got 0 listings in Brentwood and was directed towards much whiter neighborhoods.
Bill, do you think the agents included in the documentary were knowingly steering? We can assume from the statement of some of them that they were, but do you think some of it is unconscious bias going on?
Steve, I guess the first point is that it doesn't matter legally. The Fair Housing Act and your state and local laws cover behavior, not thoughts or motives. The law is not a mind reader. If an agent is treating one person better than another similarly situated person, and the difference between them is one of the 7 categories in the Fair Housing Act, the agent has violated the law. To remind you, those categories are color, race, religion, national origin, disability, sex, and family status, usually meaning having children or being pregnant. You also may have state and local laws that could include marital status, sexual orientation, other categories. I do think, though, that it's interesting to speculate about the motivations of the agents. If you want to stop something from happening, you have to consider why it's happening. Some agents may, in effect, be profiling. That is, assuming that the person of color can't really afford homes in that price range or can't qualify for the mortgage and will be wasting their time, while accepting the same price range without question from a white buyer. One of the tricky things about profiling is that it doesn't work. We usually talk about profiling as though it's some sort of shortcut to success. TV shows about FBI profilers. But, okay, maybe it's some sort of politically incorrect thing. But experts say the real problem with profiling is that it's so ineffective. Let's say you want to stop school shootings from happening. Who plays video games or who dresses a certain way is not a good predictor of who will be a school shooter. The profile fits too many good kids and may miss the kid who's planning an attack. What is a better predictor? Acquiring weapons, telling other students of plans, don't be in the cafeteria, watch out on Thursday. Or think about airport safety. Religion is not a good way to identify who will be a terrorist. You waste too many investigative resources on the wrong people and may miss paying attention to the right people. And in real estate, race is not a good way to identify which customers can afford a home. So you leave too much money on the table if you assume that people of color can't be good customers. Besides, it's illegal. So why do it? Some agents may think, consciously or not, that they'll make money faster with less effort if they steer people to homes where you'll feel comfortable. You heard an agent say something very close to that. But why assume that people want segregated neighborhoods? Besides, it's illegal. Some agents may not have a bias themselves, but may be bowing to bias they expect from others, sort of responding to the lowest common denominator. Maybe agents fear that a seller would be angry if they brought a minority buyer to their home, or they might fear that the neighbors, who of course are potential customers as sellers in the future, might be upset if the agent is seen as helping integrate a street or a block. Or agents could think that appraisers or lenders would be biased. And there is recent evidence of racial differences in appraisal and in lending. And that would make it harder to close a sale. Again, none of that matters. Say it with me. Steering is illegal. Now, I suppose it's possible that there are a few agents somewhere who may be prejudiced. I just assume that that is a tiny group, and so small as to be irrelevant to our discussion. As one realtor said to me, that there's just too much steering for it to be accounted for by only bad people doing it. The good people have to be doing it too. You know, in general, on issues of race, it's easy to apply all the heat to the question, well, who's the bigot in our office? Who might be racist? Are they saying we're racist? It's not very productive. It might be more productive to apply light to the question, how does it work in our office? Is what we're doing sure to treat people equally? Because under the law, it's what you do that counts. I also think it's interesting to consider the point of view of the home buyer, even if in our case they were actors testing the agents. Our testers often came back from the real estate offices to the newspaper office telling us, that agent was so nice, she was so helpful. They only learned the truth when our team brought the buyers together to watch videos and to look at what listings they were given. Here's a clip where you'll meet some of our testers and hear from a fair housing expert who works with them.
It almost makes me wish that the racism is more explicit so that I would know about it.
Too often I hear people who maybe aren't as familiar with this kind of work say, oh, well, they were just testers. But all you have to do is tell someone, which I have to do on a fairly regular basis, that you were turned down because of your race, and tell them the circumstances that occurred on a particular test. And you will see just how real and painful that injury is.
Elmont, it's okay, it's good, you're very close to the city. Some of them are not as nice, Elmont.
I do remember him, he was nice, and I do remember him pointing out on the map.
Oh, he loved that map. I remember that.
Yeah, he had the map, and he's like,
Some of these towns, in my opinion, are not necessarily the greatest in terms of school districts, safety, crime, resale.
One of the patterns that startled us was that some agents, time and again, would begin their presentations to the buyers. These were new customers, after all, with inappropriate comments or information that violates the Fair Housing Act. This agent with the map, he looked like General Patton planning the invasion of Sicily, a second-generation realtor. But he had a different plan for home buyers of different races. For the white buyers, it was don't get off the highway until you get past these neighborhoods. Note that it didn't seem to be offhand, casual comments. It seemed to be the sales pitch, the standard guidance for how to narrow your home search. I hate to say it, but for these agents, it seemed that steering was a big part of the service they saw themselves as selling.
What role did schools play in the action of the agents, Bill?
Oh, I don't know how it works in Arizona, but in New York, the agents told us, our buyers, over and over again, everything is by schools. Agents touted one district over another. Some districts were blue ribbon and others were declining. Of course, even if the buyers didn't have school-age children or children at all, they would still talk about resale values based on schools. And then often the agents would give different information to different buyers. Let's keep in mind that American school districts are so segregated by race in many communities that directing someone to a certain school is the same as directing them to an area with a higher or lower minority population. America's schools are more segregated now than they were 30 years ago. It's hard to believe. School segregation and housing segregation are intertwined. Now, around the country, some agents have picked up an idea, well, I can't talk about schools at all. You've heard agents say that, oh, I can't mention schools. But the Fair Housing Act doesn't say that. Agents can give straightforward, factual information. Agents can answer questions about schools. Agents can refer customers to brochures or news sites or general websites with information about schools. The problem arises legally when the agents are picking and choosing different districts for different customers or making comments about schools to steer customers. Here's a discussion of schools from our video, and you'll hear from the law professor who was an advisor on our project.
I said, do you really want your future children going to Amityville School District?
We're going to try and stay away from Freeport, Roosevelt, Hempstead for now. Because of the school district?
This part, the Salisbury part, is in demand because the schools are much, much, much better.
In Newsday's 86-pair tests, agents often applied a laser-like focus on school districts, highlighting their perceived quality when recommending places that house hunters should consider buying or avoid. Fair housing experts say touting or disparaging school districts can put agents in jeopardy because talking about school districts can be taken as a euphemism for race.
There's a few districts that I know I would I won't look in those towns.
Oh, okay.
You know, like Freeport and Baldwin and Amityville, which is part of Massapequa schools, but it's just certain parts of Massapequa.
If the customer asked about the quality of the schools and the agent responded with accurate information, I think the agent would be fine. The problem with talking about differentials in schools is that at least in the last 10 or 15 years, that has been a proxy for race. They don't mention the race of the community. Good schools are available in these areas. Those areas I'd stay away from because they have poor schools. I want to ask, did you tell that to the other tester? If you're only giving that information to one tester of the two and the only difference is the race, then you've provided what I call differential service.
If you're in Massapequa, you only want school district 23. Okay. You don't want 6 in Massapequa because that takes in Amityville and you're not going to like those schools.
This agent there you saw at the end not only appeared in the video, but helpfully made a list for each buyer of which schools to consider and sent the two buyers back unaware to the Newsday office with 2 different lists. Schools are the hardest part of this, so let's take this one step further. How do you discuss school quality without violating the Fair Housing Act or perpetuating segregated schools? You all understand you don't have to talk about race to be steering. You all understand that if the districts vary in race and you're promoting one over another, you're steering, especially if you are giving different information or being silent on that matter with the other buyer. Now, many real estate companies suggest that their agents limit their information to answering factual questions. Sure, you can say where your kids went to school, you can say what their experience was, but stay away from the trap of using labels such as good or nice or high performing, whether these vague terms come from you or from the customer. Now, here's a complicated part. If it's okay to share websites with objective information, is it okay to talk about school test scores? Write this on the blackboard 100 times. School test scores don't tell you how good a school is. School test scores don't tell you how good a school is. School test scores tell you mostly how wealthy and educated are the parents who send their kids to that school. Wealth and education of parents is a very good predictor of their children's test scores. And race in America is a pretty good predictor of wealth and education. So you see the problem. A high-performing school, so-called, may just be a wealthier area. And a school with lower test scores might actually be the higher-performing one, where good teachers are bringing up the scores of students who come in from homes with fewer advantages. Now, word about this is getting around. Just recently, greatschools.org, the school ranking website that so many agents refer customers to, has realized this pitfall and changed its ratings, especially in states where it was basing the ratings entirely on test scores. It realized, well, that's just perpetuating segregation. The National Association of Realtors has spoken up in favor of that change. So, can you talk about school test scores and refer parents to websites listing them? Yes. Legally, you can if you gave the same information to everyone. But you might consider if it's right to do that. In a country as segregated as ours, maybe that's a moral question, not a legal one. NAR says that it thinks that schools and the guidance it can give you of what you can say and can't say about schools is likely to change rapidly in the next few years. They realize that this is a work in progress because this awareness is growing. NAR is making a film that will come out later this year to try to give you better advice about schools. So watch for that.
What was the reaction from the real estate industry and government?
I guess it's fair to say, Steve, that we raised awareness of these issues. Often I'm asked, what happened to the specific agents in our videos? We know that disciplinary hearings began and are moving slowly through the pandemic, of course. Realized that there were more than 30 agents involved in cases that the state was investigating, but also their brokers. And many brokerages had more than one broker of record. So you get multiple people who are at risk of a fine or suspension or losing their license. The state has begun those cases, nearly 100 of them. We know of one agent who gave up her license rather than go through any disciplinary process, just one. And we'll wait to see if anything happens with the rest. The agents and their brokers did already testify in public. It's on YouTube before a New York State Senate committee hearing. They were sworn in and they had to answer questions. And it was an experience to watch this. The agent who said, follow the school bus, who told the white buyer, see what mothers are waiting to meet the bus. She said, I just meant for the customers to know where the bus routes were. And the agent who said the Hispanics are taking over the neighborhood, he said, well, he just meant that in a positive way. For me, the most interesting part was that the brokers all testified that they had reviewed the tests, watched the videos, and nobody did anything wrong. Their position seemed to be that if steering isn't announced, if you don't mention race, if you don't say out loud, I'm now going to violate the law, then it wasn't illegal. But you know better, and the senators in New York know better. After the hearing, the New York State Senate unanimously approved changes to state laws. We're waiting for the action to happen in the other half of the legislature. But let me show you quickly those changes, because changes in state laws tend to creep from state to state. So this passed the state Senate unanimously. We're waiting for the assembly to act. One of the senators said, well, essentially, we're just taking Newsday's investigation and turning it into individual 11 different laws that the Senate approved. And we'll just go through them quickly. It starts with testing of real estate agents, more testing. And notice the testing isn't being done by the usual regulatory agency for agents. It's being done by the state attorney general's office. Then more fees added to the broker and salesperson's renewal of their licenses. And where does the fee go? The fee goes to pay for testing. Requiring standard procedures for client intake and standard procedures for collecting demographic data on clients and on what listings they were given. Better training. We found that the training in New York was very slipshod. Damages available to victims and doubling the fines for discrimination. Where do the fines go? To pay for more testing. And then this last item here has to do coming up about supervision. If you're an associate broker, you're serving as an office manager, you're supervising others, well, then you're responsible. They wanted to make clear in the law that you're responsible for any discrimination that they commit. And then requiring housing programs in the state to try to end segregation, try to take steps to further fair housing. And, you know, if you want to stop speeding, you'll add enforcement because it has a deterrent value well beyond the person who gets the ticket. So we may see these changes spread. Nationally, HUD, the Housing and Urban Development, has begun to, let us say, resume enforcement of the Fair Housing Act under the new president and the new HUD secretary. So it'll be interesting to see what changes come nationally.
Based on your investigations, Bill, what do you think the best ways to combat racism in real estate?
Well, this may be the hardest part. Let's talk about some of the fixes that have been proposed. The National Association of Realtors has responded vigorously to our investigation and has a new program called ACT, A for accountability, C for culture change, T for training. Accountability. First, NAR is working with state associations like yours to examine state licensing laws and to find gaps and to see where there's weak enforcement of fair housing laws. And that's a new thing, a national trade group making recommendations for tougher state regulations. That's new. NAR is also developing a voluntary program of self-testing, helping companies that want to test their agents for compliance with the fair housing laws. Now, you might think there wouldn't be any such companies. In New York, the CEO of Realogy, which owns, Century 21 and Coldwell Banker and Sotheby's International, said, yes, we should be testing our own agents. And NAR said, we'll meet you halfway. And it's working on a program to help give guidelines, sort of a cookbook for how to do testing and to make liaisons with groups that would help with that testing. That could be the most consequential long-term change of all. I heard from another state association recently that said, oh, yes, we're going to start testing our agents. It'll be voluntary. Brokerages that want to participate will test their agents for them. And Buffalo, New York, the local association said, yeah, we got a grant. We're going to start testing our agents. This is very surprising. That's accountability. Now, under culture change, you know that fair housing is a core component of your realtor code of ethics. You may not be old enough to know that from 1924 to 1968, that same code of ethics prohibited selling a home in a white neighborhood to a person of color. It really continued into the 70s where using a code word, anyone presumed to be detrimental to the neighborhood. So let's acknowledge that cultures can be changed and that change can take a long time. There's a long tradition in America of legal acts, of laws that led to redlining and blockbusting, racial covenants on deeds, predatory subprime lending that stripped home equity out of minority neighborhoods. These were all illegal. We're not saying that real estate agents created segregation, but there does there is a long history of real estate agents contributing to segregation. As we talk about culture change, I was reminded last fall, many of you remember the National Association of Realtors issued a public apology for its century of contribution to segregation and discrimination. And I was watching some of the chatter from agents on Facebook and Twitter, and some were saying, I don't understand, what are we apologizing for? Let's acknowledge that these are historical facts, but that their effects continue. There have been recent studies about differences in appraisals done in Black and white neighborhoods. And these differences carry down from generation to generation, starting with the difference in wealth creation. You know, home equity is the money that the grandkids will use to go to college. So, accountability, culture, and training. New York has new classes. NAR has two efforts in training that I'd like to mention. Many of you saw last fall the new game or simulation called Fairhaven. Many of you have gone through it. I encourage all of you to. It takes about an hour. It's very instructive. It's well done. If you mess up, by the way, you get more information. If you went through with flying colors, go back and give the wrong answer, and you'll get more videos and more training. It's at fairhaven.realtor. And it's very well done. In a way, what they're trying to do is to teach not only the law, but empathy for the client's point of view. And that's interesting. The second thing is coming soon is a 3-hour course in implicit bias. It's designed as a course for brokers to take, and then for brokers to teach it or lead a discussion group on it with their agents. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. It's been surprising to see NAR take hold of this in such a positive way. It's also making a film about good role models. You know, after all, 2 of our 12 companies passed all their tests, and we wrote about their experience. NAR has a new award called Fair Housing Champions, and it's making a film about realtors who follow best practices in fair housing and prosper while doing it. I understand that quality control is very difficult in an industry where agents are independent and self-motivated, and we're all working from home or out of SUVs, and some are part-time. It's hard to have quality control. You know, during these tests, our Newsday staff would send out the testers and they'd come back, and we would discuss how hard would it be to stop steering? What would be the fix? Well, we all understand that it's not a fix to say, well, no one's ever complained, or I've never seen any discrimination, or we respond if anyone complains. We all understand that no one would know they're being steered and no one would complain. It did appear to us that the agents in our tests did not have rigorous standards for what they do and don't do with every customer. There didn't seem to be a checklist. Some would come back from an agent with a fat folder of information, and some had a skinny folder, and it's the same agent. That seems like something you could fix. Some would say that it would help if the real estate workforce were more diverse. That would have benefits, but it's not a cure-all. We saw steering and discrimination by agents of all backgrounds. It would be helpful if real estate brokerages had more offices in minority neighborhoods. Our real estate brokerages on Long Island did not. There was a lot of unfamiliarity. Maybe they'd been steering around areas so long they didn't know about the nice new homes on the waterfront in those Black neighborhoods. I wonder about the role of brokers. Brokers, do you check on which listings your agents give to customers? Do you have any awareness of that? Do you know which neighborhoods or schools and how that matched up with the customer's actual criteria? Do you have any tools for that? You know, in the MLS, when you're clicking neighborhoods or school districts or distance from this point to generate listings that go to a buyer, that's the moment when steering is happening. Does your MLS give the broker any kind of report about which school districts and neighborhoods your agents are choosing? Are you demanding that from your MLS? Do you have any kind of of standard for how to qualify customers. Do we require pre-approval from everyone or no one? Do we ask credit scores or income of everyone or no one? It seemed to us as though it was a little bit more of a Wild West situation. I assume that all of you want to obey the law. So the hard part may be recognizing where there are gaps where discrimination can creep in. NAR, and I'll close with this, NAR offers two sort of straightforward suggestions on avoiding steering. Listen to these two. One, provide customers with listings based on their objective criteria, home size, other attributes, not based on vague terms such as nice neighborhood or good schools or safe. And two, pay attention to unconscious bias. Ask yourself, why did I eliminate certain areas? Now, I'm a layman, but I have a question. Aren't those two pieces of advice somewhat contradictory? If you're only going on the objective criteria, why would you be eliminating certain neighborhoods at all? In other words, as a layman, my question is, if we gave customers all the listings in their price range with the right number of bedrooms, wouldn't steering go away? The best way to stop illegal steering may be to stop steering customers at all. Or to put it another way, why don't you send them all the listings? I trust that you all want to make sure that everybody is treated equally. Here's my hope. I hope you will share our stories and our film with everyone in your office. It's all at newsday.com/divided. About a page down on the stories, you'll see the film. It's 40 minutes. And put it on Facebook. Share it with, have a movie night when we can all get back together. But don't stop there. What I urge you to do is to have a conversation. Okay, we all want to treat everyone equally. Now, how do we know? How can the broker today have confidence that the agent is giving two customers the same listings? How can we have any confidence that two different agents are treating two customers equally, which is required under the law? I hope you'll have that conversation. What steps can we take to get closer to equal treatment? I appreciate you inviting me to meet with you, and I hope this has given you something to discuss. And I'd like to hear, I hope you have other questions that you've typed in or will type in.
Yeah, I'm going to reach out to Christina and to Marguerite to see if we do, but I'm going to lead with the first question because, Bill, I watched the video, thoroughly enjoyed it, thought it was really well put together. What I was amazed at was out of all of the people, and at least what they showed in the film, I saw exactly two brokerages step up to the plate and make at least a comment about what had gone on, and not one single agent commenting on their thing. Is that correct?
Yeah, the brokerages, you know, people don't know what to say, and they are afraid to say anything, and they know that state disciplinary action is coming, and they're very concerned about that. And so, you know, there was one brokerage that pushed back quite a bit on our facts, but then finally we made very clear, you know, one of the advantages of showing all the video and putting it all online with all the listings is that there's no more discussion about what's there is no out of context. We're sharing it with you. So I think they were really worried less about their reputation and more about the state action, and they're still in jeopardy for that. So, you know, we'll know by the end of the year how all that shook out.
And then question number 2 for me, any thoughts about going after the appraisal industry?
Well, you know, there have been some interesting studies, some of them quite large studies in the past year. One, you know, it's a large study, but it included a spectacular anecdote about the family that took down the pictures of the Black relatives and on the second appraisal increased their home value by $100,000. We all know that there's a good amount of subjectivity in appraisals. And nationally, the National Association, National Fair Housing Association is trying to urge the appraisal industry to change its methods somewhat, to employ different methods that might, well, to put it bluntly, stop penalizing minority neighborhoods. I don't want to depress you, but let me just suggest how circular a lot of this is. If if you're unaware of neighborhoods and you steer around them, and then you won't know them, and you'll appraise them at lower value because you'll be acting on your reputation or what you've heard and not on the comps. If you steer around an area, then its appreciation of homes will be slower, and that affects appraisals, and it also affects whether you encourage buyers to buy there. And you see how this is all circular. People in minority neighborhoods end up paying more per thousand in property taxes, and that's been proven. And so what happens is you can come up with a justification to steer someone around the minority neighborhoods. Well, and then the people who get steered around them are the white buyers.
Yeah.
And so in a way, it's all sort of self-fulfilling. People may feel like they're making the right choice for that buyer, that they're helping that customer. But what they're doing is harming the other customer and harming their community.
Christina or Marguerite, did you have any written down questions that you want to bring forward?
Yes, we have one. Was data also collected pertaining to treatment of other protected classes like gender or religion?
No, this is a very good question. We thought hard about it. Look, it took us 3 years as it was. So we just finally decided we'll stick to our knitting, and we're going to do race and ethnicity, Black, white, Asian, Hispanic, using buyers with clearly Hispanic surnames. We thought about doing religion, for example, sending out reliably Muslim buyers. We thought about having gay or lesbian buyers. Frankly, being in the New York City suburbs, one brokerage a small brokerage in New York City, we thought about testing it because it's Trump International Realty, and he was the president. We considered, I spent a week of my life looking into testing the Trump company, but we just finally decided, let's stick to where there's the historic discrimination that's easy. Disability is another area, and disability is what gets the most complaints to HUD under the Fair Housing Act. Disability and the other topic, pets or service dogs. Because they're under the law, they're medical equipment. They're not pets. Those there is a little more obvious. In other words, a person might know they're being discriminated against because they might know they were turned away, and they might know that they weren't shown apartments that have the right accommodations. But in terms of race, you would have no way of knowing. You'd get a smile and a handshake, and you wouldn't know you're being turned away. So it felt more important to stick to that one topic. But there are plenty of opportunities for testing in other areas.
So does anybody else have any questions? You can unmute and ask your question if you like. Comments, questions?
We'll take them.
Question. The Fairhaven simulation had, I did it about a year ago, but I do remember that there was a kind of an interesting scenario where the agent is kind of suspecting that their buyer might be being discriminated against by the seller based on race. It's kind of, they're asking for more information about them being qualified. So those are the kinds of things where it's like, are they really worried about that? Or, so I guess the question would be, what does an agent do to determine that? And then how do they help their client and advocate for their client in that scenario?
Yeah. I'm not a lawyer, and I'm not a lawyer in your state, so I'm not going to give you legal advice. But I have heard from other agents that a reluctance by some agents to push back against their client when the client is introducing things that shouldn't be into the conversation, or in other words, a reluctance to tell people, hey, there's a law and we need to follow that law. In other areas, if the plumber coming to my house next week says, well, I tell him, let's do it this way. And he says, no, I can't. There's a building code. I can't use that material. Well, then there's a building code. And I'm used to people telling me that there are regulations. And your customers can take it if you tell them, you can say there's a Fair Housing Act and there are state laws. And I can't tell you about that. Or we can't put that in the listing, right? You can push back. And maybe the most prominent way that this comes up recently is in these buyer love letters, right? In a tight market, these letters. And last week, the Wall Street Journal wrote another story recommending that buyers write these letters to the seller saying, pick me, pick me. But as NAR and others have pointed out, there are real fair housing implications here, because in effect, these letters with pictures tempt the seller into committing a fair housing violation, into pick me because your family looks like our family, or celebrates the same holidays, or has kids. And I've heard from agents who say, we've learned that we're just going to put in the listing for the buyer's agents that we're not going to pass on any such letters. Don't send them. And they get agreement from their sellers. If they come in, I'm not giving them to you, and here's why. And, if you're selling the house, the playset might get torn up. Live with it. It's okay to push back against your customers. But I suspect that a lot of steering happens because, people are insecure, and they know that there's internet competition, and they know that people can find listings anywhere and may not understand all the ways that a realtor can help them. And so they want to justify their ways they can help, and steering becomes a part of that. You tell me if I'm wrong about that, but I think that kind of insecure feeling may lead agents to cutting a fair housing corner.
Well, an extremely tight market will tend to, have people take creative license when they shouldn't. Any more questions? Who's got a question out there?
Nothing in the chat.
Nothing in the chat? All right.
I have a quick question.
Sure.
Was there any testing done on the reverse side of things, in which the tester tried to elicit a response from the agent, to entice them to violate fair housing, like saying, I really only want to be in a white neighborhood, or I really only want to be in
we chose, right. I understand your question. We chose definitely not to do that. And our testers were trained to give neutral responses and not to inject. And, our testers didn't know anything about what they wanted in the house. They didn't have an opinion about a pool or a garage or anything except the number of bedrooms and a price range. So it was wide open for the agent. And that was the design of our test. You could do it differently. We did see, we showed you an example there where the buyer had been given listings that excluded Brentwood, but showed up at a house tour outside of Brentwood with some listings he'd found online in Brentwood, and said to the agent, hey, these would be closer to the center of our search. What about them? And that's when the agent said, well, I'll look them up for you, and then sent the note that said, watch out for gang activity in Brentwood. And never did provide any service to try to help the buyer look at those homes in Brentwood. I think that's fair to say that's the closest we got to priming the pump, was to have some buyers take listings with them and ask about them. But what we weren't going to do is to say, I don't want to be near any of these kind of people, or any of that kind of inappropriate comment. Our testers were blank slates, and all that you saw was brought to the table by the agent.
Well, your way had people out themselves as making problems, as opposed to doing entrapment, which
that's fair.
Yeah. Great question, Ted. Anybody else?
Just a quick comment. I was really moved by the two ladies that thought the agents were so nice and wonderful, and then when they got back and compared notes, she was in tears. That made me tear up. I mean, it was so emotional.
It was very common, and remember that both the minority and white testers had those reactions. I mean, our white testers were angry to learn that this person they thought was so nice. We did see some affinity that agents would develop with our white testers that they didn't with the minority testers. I'll give you an example. Agents were more likely to tell white buyers where the agent lived. We're more likely with a white buyer to say, I live in this community, you'd really like it. My kids went to this high school. but then would be silent about where they lived with the minority buyer. One agent was offering babysitting to our white buyer, but didn't tell the minority buyer even what community the agent lived in, even though it was the community where they were looking. And there's some connection there. And so our buyers got that connection too, and would say, well, she was really nice. And then now they're sitting with their coworker who was discriminated against, and they didn't feel discriminated for. Remember, it's both testers who have the lawsuit. They're both being steered to segregated areas. The harm is done to both buyers, not just to the minority buyer.
Anybody else? Going once. Bill, I can't thank you enough. This has been enlightening, enjoyable, mind-blowing in some cases. I encourage everyone to go see newsday.com/divided and share it out on your social media. I did on mine this morning. It is very well done, very well put together, and I thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you. Thanks to everyone in the association and with the staff and everyone who helped put this together so smoothly. Thank you so much.
Yes, great job, Marguerite. All right. Thanks so much, everybody.
Thank you all.
Bye, Bill. Thanks
Bye-bye.
for being with us.
Thank you.